This video explains how to form passive sentences. Here's an example of a passive sentence. The chair is being made by the carpenter. Now, when you see this sentence, you're going to notice that there's kind of a lot going on with the verb. So we have three things that look like verbs in this sentence: is, being, and made. And we also have this somewhat unusual by phrase. So it says by, and then we have a noun. So I'm going to explain this type of sentence to you. So an active sentence, or what we can call a normal or usual or regular sentence, looks like this. The carpenter sanded the wood. And here we have the verb sanded in green. The carpenter is the subject of the sentence, and it's a noun, a person, right? The carpenter. And the object of the sentence, the wood. And so this follows the the sentence structure that we've studied, which is subject, verb, object, as basic sentence structure for all English sentences. Now, in the passive, things change a little bit, and the object becomes the subject, or lives in the subject slot of the sentence. So you get the sentence that we just saw. The wood was sanded by the carpenter. So this is actually the object in terms of what is receiving the action of the verb, and this is the thing doing the action of the verb, the person, the carpenter. And so we have an unusual or different type of sentence. We call this passive, where the object goes first, then a special form of the verb, was sanded, which I'm going to explain in a minute, and then by, and then the subject. Now, these sentences have the same meaning, but the difference is that they have a different emphasis, because in English sentences, the thing that comes first in the sentence is the thing that feels emphasized, or the thing that has the most emphasis. So if you want to emphasize the carpenter, you would use the active version. But if you wanted to emphasize the wood, then you could use the passive. So let's explain it with a different example. Here we have an active sentence: Carol sold the house. We have the subject Carol, verb sold, and object the house. That's what this O and S represent. And the passive version switches the object into the subject position. The house was sold, and the subject comes to the end after the by phrase, by Carol. So basically, the object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive, and the subject of the active sentence becomes the object of by. Here's some more examples of passive sentences. Fuel is burned by cars. Some more examples, and how to form the passive. So you'll notice that the passive verb has two parts. It has a main verb and a helping verb. And the main verb is in the past participle form, like we've been studying when we study the irregular verbs, right? This is the past participle of grow, is grown. And here we have a form of the verb be. Remember that we're always going to use the form of the verb be that matches the thing that's in the subject place. So we have coffee is grown by farmers. Another example, the raise was given by the boss. The photo will be printed by Alex. And you'll notice here that the past participle stays the same. This is always the past participle form. But the form of the verb be expresses the tense of the sentence. So this is in the present, this is in the past, and this is in the future. So you can change the tense of passive sentences by changing the form of to be. Here's another example. The simple present, the active sentence is cars burn fuel. The passive is fuel is burned by cars. In the simple past, we have the Rays thrilled Ben. That's the active. The passive is Ben was thrilled by the Rays. In the present perfect, we have Al has painted the photo. And in the passive version, the photo has been printed by Al. So notice in these perfect tenses, just like we've studied, we have has and be, has been printed. And in the future, we have new cars will save fuel, and the passive version is fuel will be saved by cars. All of these have that same switching of the subject and object, and in passive sentences, we know it's passive because we have a by phrase, or because we don't always have to have the by phrase, we have this form of the verb be plus the participle. So try this yourself. If you needed to change this sentence, the squirrel gathered the nuts, to passive, how would you do it? Think about it for a second. So all we have to do to change this to passive is take the object and put it in the front, and then take the subject and put it at the end after by, and we get the nuts were gathered by the squirrel. Notice that since this is in the past, we used a past version of the verb be, which is were. Here's a passive sentence. The wall was painted by Matthew. So what would the active version of that sentence be? All you have to do is take the noun that's after by and make it the subject, and take the noun that starts the sentence and make it the object. It looks like this. Matthew painted the wall. Again, this past form of be indicates that we should keep the past when we make it active. Here's another example. The voters will determine the election results, and the passive is the election results will be determined by the voters. Now let's talk a little bit about using the by phrase. Here's a passive sentence. This painting was done by my mother. Here's some more. This desk was made by Manuel. The by phrase in this sentence gives us some important information. So it's not very interesting or important to say this desk was made. But this desk was made by Manuel gives us important information. This desk was made in Taiwan. Corn is eaten in many places. That apartment was built in 2007. Spanish is spoken in many countries. Usually in sentences like this, there is no by phrase. Why? Well, in these sentences, who is doing the action is not that important. Or maybe is information that the person who's writing or speaking this sentence doesn't know. So, for this one, Spanish is spoken in many countries by people. That doesn't give us any extra information, right? We can understand that without the by phrase. And maybe indeed that apartment was built in 2007 by a certain company. Maybe we don't know that information, and so we can leave it out. Okay, my mother is a great artist. She painted many beautiful portraits. So here, the focus of these sentences is my mother. If we change those to passive, this painting was done by my mother, that one was done by her friend, then the focus becomes more on the paintings, okay? So here's a couple of more practices changing from active to passive. Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. And you can think now, take a minute to think what the passive version would be. Hamlet was written by Shakespeare. Many students use computers. Take a second to think of how to make it passive. Computers are used by many students. Tina taught me how to knit. I was taught to knit by Tina. And here's just a little brief overview of passive forms of the present and passive progressive, because they look a little bit funky, but you'll be able to spot them. And I think there's only one on the final exam like this. So here's a passive version. A photo is being taken by Elton. So the active, he is taking photos. Photos are being taken by him is the passive. It gets a little bit confusing, but just keep noticing that the main verb that has the content, goes into the past participle form. And then this becomes a form of be here. So look at this other one. She is writing a book. A book is being written by her. The present progressive passive form is am, is, or are plus being plus the past participle. So it might look strange because there's two forms of the verb be, but this one is being. It doesn't change. The one that changes is this. Here's another version in the past. He was taking photos. Photos were being taken by him. She was writing a book. A book was being written by her. So the past progressive form is was or were plus being plus the past participle. So let's look at some practice ones going from active to passive. Two great teams are playing hockey. Hockey is being played by two great teams. Someone was building a guest house in Bhutan. A guest house was being built in Bhutan. Alan is studying the memo. The memo is being studied by Alan. So please remember that you can go back through this video and pause at any time to study the examples. And if you have any questions, please send me an email. Bye.